gone the entire retreat time, didn't enter the key, still don't have to enter the key. Sometimes 2 days goes by, enter the key. There's no rhyme and reason to it. It's weird.
That's always strange when that happens.
All right. And here we are. It is Monday, second episode of Raw since the second Dualistic Unity retreat. I'm excited about this one because, frankly, I had no idea what we were going to talk about going into this. And then we were having a conversation wherein we were talking about reality and the experience of this being very dreamlike, in that everything is kind of hearsay. You really can't confirm that this is not a dream. And I was saying to Andrew that a common experience that people have, usually between like 7 to 10 years old, is the realization, is this real? Or the question, is this real? And often we'll ask our parents or we'll ask an adult and they'll kind of look at us and go, you best get back to work. And it's just because it's uncomfortable for them. But the question aside, what dawned on me is that really is when the concept of real hit us, that there was a such thing as real versus whatever it is we were experiencing up until that point. So the concept of real created the necessary opposite of unreal or imaginary. But up until that point, real and imaginary were the same thing to us.
So this should be fun. So, yeah, because there was, as you said, there was no dichotomy between the two. So there was no idea that came in, because real, everything is always real to you, right? And it's our conceptual idea. So the idea of real necessitates the idea of not real or imaginary, or, the imagination, or whatever, all the things that kids utilize so much more than adults. And then start asking questions like, oh, is this all real? And it is such a common occurrence for children to ask those sorts of questions and dig into those sorts of things. But then it's the adults that come around and just tell them like, oh, it is, this is how it is, this is real, you're real, I'm real. And so everything you think you're curious about isn't. And that line creates the idea that this is what I think it is. And all of the concepts I settle upon are what I think they are. And all of a sudden the description is the described. And that kind of creates that. And then so we'll have dreams when we sleep. And when we're in the dream, when we're sleeping, very often, eventually people can sometimes start to recognize, I know Ray lucid dreams a lot. So in the dream, you recognize that it is a dream, which I think is almost directly correlated to being awake and recognizing that you're in a dream. But most people, when they're sleeping, they don't recognize that they're in a dream. So you get pushback when you say things like, this could easily be a dream. Nothing you can say could possibly convince me that this isn't a dream. Or are you just going to say, oh, it's not a dream? What are you talking about? You're crazy. That doesn't convince me of shit. That is not a valid argument whatsoever. And there's so many things in the scientific realm that are even showing us that, atoms are made up of 99% empty space. All of the things in our environment are made up out of the same shit that we're made up out of, the base elements. So it really does come down to the conceptual ideas that create the division that causes us to think that this is quote unquote real. And there are things that are not real, things that exist inside of our mind. But the things that exist inside of our mind are the things like, a creator, a God, the idea of us. They all exist inside of our mind. So if the things in our imagination aren't real, and all the concepts and ideas only exist inside of our mind, and even go as far to say that the environment that we exist within exists inside of our mind. We just have this idea, the conceptual idea of our mind that is, we think is inside of our head. And yet no one's ever been able to prove that whatsoever. If anything, we've gotten closer to proving that our brain is actually within our mind as opposed to our mind being within our brain. Like we are tapping into localized sort of, a field of consciousness that we tap into, and our heart, is spreads out 6 feet from our body. And that's why you can feel people who are not touching you. And on top of that, even when someone quote unquote touches you, they're not actually touching you. There is no connection, like you have the idea, you hallucinate the idea that you're touching something in front of you, but you're not, there is no actual touch. So it's just your brain telling you that. And so when you're sleeping, we have we don't think that, oh, I'm in a dream right now. It feels very real because it is to us when we're in it. And then we wake up and say, oh, it was just a dream. Who's to say you're not going to wake up one day from this and recognize, oh, it was just a dream?
Who's to say you don't every time you go to sleep and you're in a different dream? Who's to say that this wasn't a part of the dream that came before that moment, right? Because that's the thing. It's a dream, which leads me to an interesting question. Can you touch anything in a dream? It's all you.
Wait, can you? I don't think
you can't touch anything in reality. So you can't touch anything in a dream. Anything that you touch in a dream is just more of you. So you're not actually touching it per se, because there's no disconnection. Same thing with reality, right? We're not touching one another because we're still in that dream. We are the same thing, right? So there's no disconnection. Like when we're thinking about touching one another in general, we're thinking about two beings interacting, but that can't be. And so you have, oh, wow. So you have very much like the closest resemblance to two beings touching possible, but they never actually do on the microscopic. I think that's interesting. Likewise, you're saying the field of consciousness that we embody or receive and whatnot. And I love that perspective. I really do. My problem is that I have a bigger and bigger issue believing it, because we always talk about, the chemistry in our brains and the energy flowing through our body, and the the field of consciousness that we're receiving through our DNA and embodying and all that shit. And I think that's just really, really detailed ways to describe the aspects of this dream. I don't think those are the actual things that are driving anything. I think that's just how we interpret it, because we don't want to just be the whole thing. The alternative is to be the dreamer. So there has to be a body, right? There has to be a body. There has to be something that is limiting me. Because the alternative is that there isn't, and that this is all me. And so I would like to receive consciousness from a field around me. I would like to believe that my heartbeat echoes 6 to 12 feet in every direction, quote unquote. But that's just interpretation. There is no direction. There is no physical universe. It's just awareness experiencing itself. It's just a dream.
Because in the and we discussed this back a while ago about non-local universe, and so it really is just us interpreting how, like, oh man, because in the non-local universe there's the things thousands, millions of miles apart, they interact at the same exact time. So there is, the time and space is an illusion, as we know and have talked about many times. It's only the perception. And so everything that happens is just our best way of, the best we can do in terms of interpreting what's happening. But in recognizing that it's all you, and recognizing that there is no disconnection, anything ever is, nothing is ever the reality of what we think it is. It's all just our interpretation. It's all just us settling upon something in order to avoid that it isn't all us, or in order to avoid that it is all us. That's all these things are, even with, the field of consciousness and, receiving consciousness, or
the source.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all just to make us more comfortable. But it's funny because even that conversation of non-local universe awareness, like they're still all just interpretations that we settle upon, but people like that's right in front of us and people still aren't willing to look at that even, or the recognition that your brain exists inside of your mind, not the other way around, that everything exists inside of your mind because it's just you, like it must, everything you're seeing is being received, like it's kind of right in front of us all the time. And even those things, even those that maybe are quote unquote closer to being the reality of what it is in a sense, but are still interpretations, the ones that get a little bit less comfortable, we're still not willing to look at, despite them being basically more or less proven. Like we're getting almost closer to it, if you know what I'm saying. And people still aren't willing to look at that because the closer we get to it, the less comfortable it becomes, the more we have to let go of our comfort, our false certainty, all of those things that are showing us more and more how much this may just be your dream.
It's interesting. This is going to be a fun conversation for everyone who just started joining us. We're already in the deep end. Here's a question for you. Where do your dreams take place? So if your awareness isn't located in your body, where are you dreaming? So dreams are non-local, right? Dreams don't have a location. So the question is, if you're dreaming and your body died, would you keep dreaming? Would your awareness continue to flip from one reality to another, as that is actually reality, if not tethered to this one anchor that is making a very linear timeline because you're attached to it as being you?
You might have to say that one again.
Okay, so you are awareness. You are the universe attached to a specific character. And in that attachment, you are experiencing a linear timeline from the beginning of that character to the end. This is what this is the story of this character that you have attached to because you've attached to every other character. And this is one of those things that you're attached to and you're experiencing it from that point of view. But you are awareness. You're not the character. You're just attached to this character for this ride. And when you go to sleep, you let go of the character and you go to other rides as other characters, because you never think to yourself, am I Andrew? Very rarely in a dream do you think to yourself, am I Andrew? You're always you, but that's really it. So my question is, if you went to sleep and you were going from reality to reality as awareness, not as Andrew, as awareness in a dream, and your body as Andrew dies, would you continue dreaming? Would you continue going from reality to reality to reality, not coming back to the story of Andrew until maybe you got attached to another story and poof, now you're an infant going through another story?
Yeah. So, and fuck. Yeah. Because who's to say that isn't exactly what's happening right now? Like we have this, like you can't prove this isn't a dream. So who's to say that this isn't me just being lost in this and recognizing that I'm not just this. Oh, I've never just been Andrew. I've always been reality. I've always been all of it. And
the dreamer.
I get glimpses as I sleep into other iterations, but could it be, oh man, this is fuck. Oh, this is gonna be fun. You can't prove that by any means. And everything within all of this, all of and that video you made talking about the recognition that this could all be a dream, in science and philosophy and religion. Sure, we can talk about them all we want. Doesn't mean that it's not still within the dream. Doesn't change anything about this still being your dream. And so as you sleep and go through things and on certain substances that we've talked about, salvia, potentially going through those lifetimes, who's to say that isn't just a glimpse into you, because you're eternal, you're infinite. So all of those iterations of you have always been, and you haven't left your perspective here now. Like you never leave your perspective of you being here now. It doesn't mean the character that you think you are, but it's just you being here now in all of the iterations that could possibly be. And it's this one has gotten so convincing that we've gotten lost in it. That, and it's not even me, I've gotten lost in it.
Are you sure you've gotten lost? Because think about it. Out of all of the potential stories that could exist, there are stories. Well, I mean, all of those stories you would be both intensely interested from start to finish and kind of not interested in it at all, just in that they exist in potential, right? So what I mean is that it's kind of like anything that you would look at in reality right now. Like you could glance at it and go, oh yeah, okay, there's a filing cabinet. But if you went and took the time to focus on the filing cabinet, you would see details that you didn't. You might find the manufacturer, you might understand how it was made. Like all of a sudden, the whole detail of that cabinet comes into focus, right? It's the same thing with our lives. When you're dreaming, you're just going, oh, look, a cabinet. Oh, look, a room. Oh, look, this reality. Oh, look, that reality. And you're just flitting from one to the other. But if you were to stop and focus on any of them, that dream fleshes itself out. All of a sudden, there's more detail. Well, imagine if, not even imagine if, well, what if, not even what if, there is a part of you at every given point, regardless of your current focus being distracted or narrowed, there is a part of your brain that's taking in everything, a part of your brain, a part of your awareness is taking in everything all the time. So just as in every dream that you kind of dive into quickly and dive out, there's a part of your awareness that experienced that whole fucking thing. In order for you to process the context of the small little sliver that you're willing to experience. So as much as that sliver exists, the entire story that makes that sliver possible also equally exists from the point of view of an awareness that's deeply immersed in it, which is yours. Simultaneously, as you're flitting in and out of them, you are also simultaneously completely immersed in them by virtue of you being limitless.
So, because so we're saying as you go in and out of different experiences, there is a necessary component of your awareness that's experiencing the entire thing. And you have, it's like,
oh, that's good. I'm just going to interrupt for a second. It's not a component that experiencing the entire thing. It's the entire awareness that's experiencing the entire thing. It's your sliver that's not. It's your narrow view of it that's not experiencing the entire thing, just because you're still identifying with Andrew dreaming.
So the component is me. And it's not, and we perceive the division in order to be able to, it's not even like, I was going to say
virtue of the experience. We have to experience division in order for there to be experience. Not that there is division, but this is the only, see, again, remember I keep saying like, this is all just the potential of a division, right? But because there is no reality, because there is no real, the potential in itself is real. So as soon as there's the potential of a division, there's you experiencing that potential as real.
This is we're getting into it quick here. This on a Monday morning. This is fun. I'm doing my best to follow. This is an aspect where yeah, I'm gonna have more and more questions as we go. But
you and me both, buddy. You and me both.
Yeah, I know. But so with that being the entire thing has always been the reality of all of reality, and that perspective of division must exist in order to have any semblance of an experience whatsoever.
I would say it must exist by virtue of us being limitless, by virtue of there not being a limitation, right? If there's no limitation, that means the potential for a division exists, right? But it can't possibly exist as everything's one thing. So it's just the potential. So see, for a long time, you asked me once, what's the big difference between my perspective back in that video in 2005 and my perspective now? And I said, there's less me now. And what I meant by that is, if you listen to that video in 2005, I was very much saying we chose to come here. We chose to have this experience. That is where I differ now. I don't think this is a choice. I think this exists by virtue of us being everything. I think in there being unity, duality exists in potential, and that this is the experience of that potential, but it's just potential to unity. To duality, it's absolutely real because it's the observer versus the observed, right? But there is no observer-observed dichotomy. That does not exist except perceptually. And so this is all just perceptions of ourselves that must exist because we are limitless and we can perceive ourselves limitlessly.
So using the term everything exists in potential, like in potential, it's starting to become almost clear. Like we're starting to show that, it seems like, that everything exists in potential because it's just our perception that it comes down, like,
It's
you know,
the double
touching
slit experiment.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're both the particle and the wave. It's potential. Like everything is the particle and the wave, right? Until it gets compressed down to whatever potential we're seeing, right? But both existed. Both paths existed at the same time. Think about that. Okay. The particle went through both slits at the same time. Why? Because they both exist in potential until they're observed, and then that potential collapses to one. But it's just in potential until it's observed. And that's reality. It's just potential until the observer.
So like everything existing within potential, like all experience exists here now. And the observer, that like one has to be experienced in, is it that one has to be experienced in order to maintain the illusion almost?
I think they're part and parcel of the same thing. I think that both the observer and the observed that see the one particle going through one slit, and the observer and the observed that see the other particle going through the other slit, are one and the same. That the observer and the observed are one. They're one variation and the other variation. They're both the same awareness, but in different variations of seeing that experience. Both experiences exist at the same time. Both awarenesses, in fact, exist at the same time because there's the same awareness. So it's both perceptions of that moment exist at the same time to the same awareness. This is why I always try and compare it to eyeballs. Like right now, if you were to close one of your eyes and look at your microphone, you would see it in one location. If you close the other eye and look through the opposite eye, you would see your microphone slightly to the side of where it was. The microphone hasn't fucking moved. Neither have you. But you're looking at it from a slightly different perspective, making it an entirely different experience, experienced by the same awareness.
And that's all of us.
Reality.
Yeah.
We are all eyeballs, slightly different perspectives. And what's funny is not just you and I are eyeballs, but every iteration of you and I.
That all exist in potential. And it's not that.
And will become reality, quote unquote, over a long enough timeline in eternity.
Right. And so it's not that. Okay. So with all iterations of me and you existing in potential, it's not that we're choosing the iteration. It's just that it's happening. Because even the iteration of me that started this episode versus where we're at now is a different iteration. It's that I have attached to the story the character enough that I don't see the shift in that. And it's not that I chose the different iterations as I went, but it was by virtue of infiniteness. Like it's not a choice, but it's just, I don't know how to say it. Like,
I get it. This
yeah.
is the trick. Because the moment when we started this podcast always exists. It still exists. We're still there now, starting the podcast. But we're also here now, halfway through the podcast, not even halfway through it. Okay, so both of those moments exist. But why did you experience a progression from there to here? If not, because you wouldn't be able to reconcile it otherwise against your self-image. This is the only thing that makes sense to you based on how you perceive yourself. What if that's the only difference in terms of how we experience quote unquote time? And we know that because our perception influences the flow of time.
Okay. I don't know if I'm fully following this one. Because we've been here before.
We've been here.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
We've talked about how time both compresses and slows down, right? Like we know time flies occasionally, and then we know that time can last forever in other cases. But nonetheless, we are still tethered to this idea of linear time, this idea of causality, right? That everything must have a reason. Everything must come from somewhere instead of just existing constantly. We really are addicts to that entire logical process because it's comforting to some degree. But in the same way that we must have a Big Bang, Andrew, it must be, this all came from somewhere, right? It's the same thing. We must have a reason that this works. And so to us as an awareness, we're just like, well, no, it makes sense that this will lead to that and this will lead to that, which I find really interesting because as we change our perception of what's possible, we change our lives. Isn't that very interesting that all of a sudden we tell ourselves certain things are possible and they become so? I don't know. That seems kind of suspicious.
Yeah. So it's not that we're creating reality by any means. Like it always exists in potential, each and every iteration of me and you, each and every moment exists in potential in, and always has, and always will. And as we shift and not even convince ourselves of anything, but just let go of the ideas that we've convinced ourselves of in order to keep certain things at bay, more and more starts to open up, more and more starts to become possible because it always was. And even, like, and I just think of like the mile time or something like that, things like that. But even, the walking on water to wine.
Inventions, corporations, large projects, any of these things. It's interesting because anybody who's ever look at the invention of the light bulb, 1,000 different failures to get there. But the entire time is, I'm just going to keep going. I'm just going to keep going. What if that was just the awareness, processing like, this is what I need to do to get here. Must have hard work, right? And how many of us fall victim to that, must work hard in order to succeed. And that's not often the case anymore, right? Now it's, being smart, being aware, striking the right time in the right place, that kind of thing, right? And so if you're always convincing yourself, no, got to get a job, got to work hard, got to put in the hours, got to do all that, you might be missing opportunities that, you could go viral, for example, or explode overnight. You don't know. And so again, it comes down to what are you willing to admit is possible? And that changes the trajectory. And I really do wonder if that's the case, if all of us collectively are just exploring different possibilities now, because we're not so caught up in the common narrative of you get a job or you go to school, you get a job, you go for your pension, you wait till your retirement, you get your house. All of a sudden that's not making sense to us as an awareness anymore. And so we're exploring all of these different avenues, but I don't necessarily think that this is the linear experience that we think it is. And it's so interesting because, you were saying, and I know I've said this too, everything exists in potential. But The whole thing is everything exists in reality because potential is reality to us, right? We are reality. And so everything that is potential for us is real somewhere at some time as here and now as you. That's the thing. No matter what experience it is, it's always here now, I. Always. And so if it exists in potential, it exists in reality on some planet, somewhere in the span of eternity. Isn't that interesting? But we know that time and space don't exist. So what I just said doesn't make any sense. Somewhere, sometime in the span of eternity means here now as you. So everything in the span of eternity is here now as you. It's just that we perceive it broken up over time and space because we have the experience of duality.
Okay. So then in that experience of duality, like there's a part of me that wants to ask, like, why duality? But there's no why, right? It's all
It's literally the only thing that can follow unity. See, this is where sacred geometry and all that starts to come in because they'll start with like a single point, and then you have a line, then you have a triangle, then you have a square, right? Well, if you think about it, the single point is unity. The line is the beginning of duality. You have 2 points that have to connect, and everything expands from there. Now you have more complicated versions of that duality, like a triangle or square, pentagram, all of that, and it gets more and more complex, and they start working together. And that's why when you're tripping and you look around at the patterns, what do you see? Sacred fucking geometry, that everything is in fact a mixture of different patterns working together on multiple different scales at multiple different sizes and vibrating at multiple different frequencies, which also indicate a pattern. So everything is in fact geometric patterns, but they all stem from the original split between 1 point to 2. And that's why everybody gets really caught up in sacred geometry, trying to figure out how the universe works, to the point where alchemy at one point would actually try to meditate on a particular shape, three-dimensional shape around the practitioner while they were doing their thing, because they thought that that would actually affect the mentality and the ripple that would have.
okay. So I'm following that with the split. It's like the unity being the point and the split, and you have line, triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon, and all of that, and you span that out, and then it's no longer the rigidity of the corners and the points. It's humans, where it's the same sort of, it's just so fucking complex. We've gotten so complex that we can't possibly fathom it's stemming from that, but it still is stemming from that because nothing's changed besides our perception of it, and we have time to make sense of the process of the 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6 to 7 and all of that. And but yeah, and to me, I'm still getting caught in the linear time component. But then, like we were talking about a couple weeks ago, with each and every moment, like the past is necessary in order to make sense of where we're at now, in order to make sense of here now. And so it isn't so much that it did happen, because even looking back at the past, didn't happen in the way that we think that it did. Like our memories are always contorted by our perception of ourselves here now. And so it's always stemming from here now.
Absolutely, because as an infinite intelligence, every possibility that must exist must also have an accompanying universe. And so that is immediately brought into creation through the potential of this one moment.
Right. Okay. So I don't even know where to where to go from there.
I don't know. This has been a lot of fun so far. I just wanted to say hi to everyone who has joined us. I understand we're about 35 minutes into this deep dive. No idea where this came from, except from the memory that as a child, there was a point where we recognized there was a concept of real, and we weren't sure if this was it. And it was just because all of a sudden the concept was introduced of real. And so that spawned this conversation. I just wanted to mention, of course, that we will be continuing this in about an hour and a half in a live group that you can join for $5 a month, patreon.com/dualistic unity. We really appreciate the support, and we love chatting with everybody. We do have some changes coming up in season 5. Do you want to get into these now, or would you like to continue deep diving?
We can dig in quick. Let me settle into some of this and then continue after.
Awesome. So in season 5, just because as much as Andrew and I love doing these and we love these groups, we recognize that everybody's very much used to the way that we discuss things. They're used to our language and the concepts that we tend to rely on when we're discussing certain subjects. And so we've become very familiar is what I'm saying. And when I was training in Kung Fu, one of the things my Sifu taught me was that if you're practicing with the same partner all the time, you actually start to learn a little less because you get familiar with them. You start to get a little certain about what they're going to do or how they're going to act or how they're going to respond to certain things. And so you learn less from them. And so in season 5, Andrew and I are actually going to start bringing in some guest hosts in our Patreon group calls. And so it won't always be Andrew and I. We're going to have some of the previous guests of our podcast come on to the Patreon calls and host a group in our stead so they can talk to you about their insights. You can share things with them. You can get a different perspective. You can learn different things. And then you can meet with Andrew and I in one of the groups that we are hosting and share everything that you've picked up. And so I figured this is a great way to kind of push on the accelerator pad in terms of our collective growth. I'm very excited. I'm not going to announce who the guest hosts are quite yet, but in season 5, we will get into it. And that is going to be starting at the beginning of May.
Yeah, that's I'm excited for everyone to get to interact with more and more people with more and more different, differing perspectives. It'll all be people who circle around the conversation that we have and people who have been guests of the podcast, people who are very familiar with the conversation. So, we won't be bringing in a priest or anything like that. So don't worry. But I think it'll be awesome for everyone because a lot of with these groups too, like so much of it is just the conversation. Like as much as we are, the hosts of the groups and whatnot, everyone involved in them is so articulate and so getting so deep into things that it's really just, the most important aspect is having the environment and the ability to have the conversation, which is what we will continue providing. And there's going to be other hosts mix in, but we're also going to continue hosting majority of the groups as well. So no concern there by any means, but I'm very excited.
I just want to toss in a little quickly here that as much as that's true, there is one perk to Andrew and I not necessarily being on the group calls 5 days a week, which would be that we can use that time to actually come and meet some of you personally. That is the thing that's going to change as we're moving forward. Everybody who's been on Patreon recently understands that we have numerous small mini retreats that are coming up. We have 2 coming up in June in Denver, Colorado. Except for one ticket, those events sold out pretty much immediately. We have another event coming up in Vermont on August 24th. We have the Netherlands retreat coming up on November 11th. Now that's not a mini retreat. That's a full retreat, 9 days. November 11th to November 19th. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be fantastic. We're in an entirely different country. I've never been there. I don't speak Dutch, so you get to see me entirely in uncertainty, which I'm sure is going to be entertaining as hell. And then after that, we're going to be doing another event. And I believe we've agreed that we're going to be doing that in early February in Florida before our final event, not final, but I guess the last one that we've planned out so far, or at least in the works with, which is our Australia retreat, which is actually going to last longer than 9 days because we're traveling all the way to Australia. So we're going to go to Australia, do a 9-day retreat, and then we're going to travel around for a little bit after that and hopefully see all of our Australian audience because why not? We'd love to meet you too. So that's what I'm saying is that we may not always be on the group call, but we're going to be out there meeting one of you eventually. We'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's the beauty of all of this is the fluidity of being able to shift and move, and as you know, the more in-person events necessitate our time there, it's going to be a lot of fun, and it already has been. We have 2 retreats in the bag, and they've both been very transformative, very impactful, very exciting, and just a ton of fun. Really is a relaxing time to chill, hang, have these conversations that we all enjoy having, and and so the mini retreats are going to be awesome because they're going to be that, and just not as much time away from, not as much of a commitment from a work standpoint or a monetary standpoint. So yeah, we're doing all we can to interact with more and more of you. So yeah, excited to see what all of this brings, but it should be, all positive shifts that are going on. So looking forward to what it leads to.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. So that all said, you said something earlier, and I'd like to get back to it because I said this, I think it was in season 1 or season 2, it could have been Lucid Living, that recognizing that this is a dream leads to lucid dreaming. I would like to explore that a bit more, because if that's the case, that kind of implies an underlying lesson, no?
Yeah, and that is
That's a damn good question, isn't it? If you, by virtue of accepting that this is a dream, are able to actually have more influence in your quote unquote dreams, then that would imply that the lesson extends here as well, right? Because they're directly correlated. Because all you're accepting is not that this is a dream, but that this is you. See, that's what when we're saying that looking at this as a dream, what we're saying is letting go of the idea that it exists outside of your awareness. That's really all we mean when we say this is a dream. It's not that this is any less real. It's that dreams are real by virtue of them being an extension of your awareness. So they're real to you. And this is very much real to you. It's just that it's all you. So this is absolutely real to everyone.
right, because this just hit me, and this is another thing I've been settling upon. Dream is just a word. We have a whole story around that word dream, a whole narrative around that word dream. But a dream, the word dream isn't what a dream is. We've just settled upon that. And so saying that, oh, this could just as easily be a dream, you can't prove otherwise, almost has this underlying connotation that this isn't real, but it is. And it's almost just bringing into the conversation the fact that the dream that you think you have when you fall asleep is as real as this is. They're equally real, and that experience that you have is equally as real as this one to you, because dream's just a word, just another concept, just another idea that we've created a narrative around. But the reality of that experience is just you here now. It's not a dream, just a word, a way of making sense of an experience that we perceive as not being as real as this one, because we've settled upon this being as real as we think it is. And that's what we were talking about early in this episode with, children feeling like, is this really real? Is this all real? And then just getting told like, yeah, it is what it is. This is real, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, dream is just a word. And it's allowed us to create a dichotomy between what we experience while we're sleeping and what we experience when we're awake. And that idea of this being real is all that is in the way of any other experience that we ever have of us, me being here now, having. And that's just, it's always real to me.
So now it's just getting rid of that pesky self-image that's so limiting. And what I mean is that See, it's funny because if we look at it as the imagination, we have no problem with this. Okay, so let's just say I ask you to imagine that you are on a snowy mountaintop and you are covered in animal furs and you have darker skin. Let's say you have a white beard. You're quite old. You're used to this mountaintop. You've lived this mountain your entire life. You have a family down in the village that's down the way. You've been hiking up here all day long, and you do this regularly because it's good for your health. It gives you a chance to clear your head. And this is just something you do. You look down at your feet. You're all covered in furs. Maybe you got some snowshoes because, you know, the ice and the snow and all that. And now you see all of that. You see all of that in your head, and you're like, it's my imagination. I can look at anything I want in my imagination. Why do you think that is? Why is it that you think you can envision anything you want in your imagination, but you don't think all of those things existing in reality are you? Except for the perception that you are a small, limited body in a universe that you're separate from. See, that's the whole point. Just like with your dreams, you're going into a reality that you're like, oh, wow, this seems so real. And then you come back to this one. But the part of you that's there is still there. It's still there, and it's real to them or you as them. It's just that you kind of flit it in because you're in there all the time. You're in all of them all the time, just as everything in your imagination exists right now. Which direction do you want to go? Where do you want to look? And I would say that our dreams and our imagination are just as much a part of the process of our growth and intelligence as everything else, as all of the concepts and all of the conversation and everything else. I think the dreams that we have are the necessary realities that we have to experience by virtue of the process that we're going through at the time. I think that this character has a certain thing it needs to learn. And so when it needs to, it can reach into any one of those other realities that are all me and pull a lesson, because they're all my reality, in that they're all your reality. And there is no separation.
And so imagination, dream, all of it is just me tapping into another infinite perspective. And we've talked about this past, like right now, I can very clearly, with my eyes open while watching this, also see me from right there looking down at me talking in it. Like, it is clear as day. I'm seeing this, and I can see my entire desk, my computer, me making these movements right now. And now I'm seeing it from that side over there, and I'm seeing it in my mind. Like, I can very clearly see it in my mind. And because I've been to Ray's house before, I can see from behind his head right now his computer screen, and me, Andrew, on that computer screen. I can see that right now, clear as day. I can see Ray nodding his head with his white t-shirt on and see the computer screen. And so and we write that off so fucking quick. Oh, just your imagination. What the fuck? Oh, Jesus. This is like, I know we've had this. Yeah, exactly. I know we've had this conversation before, but it's like really tripping me out right now, which I'm enjoying. But oh my God, because it's just tapping into, there is no division between any aspect or iteration of my awareness. And so going in and out, and so that last part you said, in regards to learning a lesson, I'm curious about your perspective on that, because that to me sounds a little bit along the lines of like a Dolores Cannon type thing. And so, and I know you don't
anything right now.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's the difference?
Difference between what?
Between what you're learning in a dream and what you're learning now. See, it's not you're learning anything from me. You're still learning anything you need to learn. You're pulling everything you need out of this reality or out of this experience and processing it according to everything else that you're currently processing. There's no difference between that and a dream. When I say a lesson, I don't mean like somebody's teaching you something. I mean, you're going through an experience that's helping you change in a way that you were already changing. It's just that this experience, you're going to pull something out of that's going to help you change in that same way. It's the same as every other conversation.
Right.
It's not like the universe is teaching you a lesson. It's your will. Do you want to learn it?
Yeah.
right? Are you, in fact, because you can spend your entire life having dreams and never learn anything from them because you always come out and try and identify again with them. You're like, what does it mean about me? Rather than recognizing that, it's actually implying something about your nature, not being quite so limited, right? That's really all it's implying. And so when I say lesson, I mean the experience of dreaming without necessarily the assumptions that it's a dream.
So the lesson is not necessarily because, okay, that makes sense, because with the whole Dolores Cannon shit, it's like, it's super fucking egotistical. It's like Andrew is learning all these lessons, but because I'm not Andrew, so it's not that I'm learning, but it's that I have the opportunity to take from things what I can, not because I'm progressing anywhere either. And it's not because that's another thing with the like the egg
direction
theory. The egg theory, and people, when I talk about these types of things, always get a shitload of comments about that. But that is also from the perspective of being divided, because it ends with you become a god, and then a god of a god, and then it's like you're becoming the supreme being, as if you're not already it experiencing it. And so it's not that you're
point. So when I say lesson, what we're really saying is just unraveling another layer of self-awareness.
right. And so because you're not progressing anywhere, it's almost like you're letting go of the perspective of a progression, because it's the idea of a progression that hinders you from recognizing more clearly what this is. Like all those stories, narratives, paths, journeys, in quotes for those listening, are taking you further from the reality of what's happening, because it's you experiencing that, your idea of you experiencing that, as opposed to just being it, experiencing it. So it's not that there's lessons that you should learn or you need to learn, but they're there when you're paying attention. Because why not?
Good question. Right? That's exactly it. It's like you were saying earlier in this episode. It's kind of obvious when you're looking at it, right? It's only because you want to look at it. You can make it not obvious. Just get distracted. No problem. As soon as you're focused on yourself, everything becomes clear as mud. Right? So you don't have to look. You don't have to let go. You don't have to surrender. You don't have to let go of your idea of yourself as a small, limited thing. You can continue to do any of that. Or not. But that means a massive shift in perception, because you said it. There's nowhere to go. There's nothing to become. There's no journey. It's the acceptance that everything that you are right now is everything that is. And there's a lot in there, but that requires you to be still and silent enough to let it unfold, because we are still experiencing time, which is beautiful, because it means that everything you are gets kind of paced out over a duration, as opposed to the reality where it's all happening now at once.
This is funny and not surprising at all, but I was talking with my brother yesterday about like a white noise and having a background fan when you go to sleep. And I used to have that like for years and years and years. I thought I needed that white noise, and it wasn't until maybe 6 months ago that I stopped. And I actually really don't like when there's like a background noise going on. And before then, I couldn't stand silence when I was sleeping. And I had a dream last night. Someone else said this, quote unquote, someone else said this in the dream, something along the lines. I wrote it down on my phone, but I'm on live over there, so I'll check after. But it was something along the lines of, I didn't appreciate silence until I became silent in myself, or until I became more silent within myself, like in regards to the narrative, the story, all of that coming up. And then there was like a appreciation for the, external silence as the narrative was less noisy. And now I enjoy that. And we've talked about before, falling asleep, and how I've come to appreciate that time and just like the exploration of my imagination before I go to sleep. And before then, there was none of that, because it was always about me. And so many people, before they fall asleep, that's one of the toughest times for them, because there's nothing to distract them from what's going on in there. And so much of it is in regards to the narrative and the story. And so through that, I forget where that started from, but it's all always there. And we're just really distracting ourselves so much, like cluttering everything so much that it's not that we don't have the capacity to see it, but there's so much in the way that's taking us from it, in a sense.
That's a good question. It's interesting because I don't know, this one's tough. You see, religion has always tried to say that there's some reason that despite all of our limitless capacity as God, and that all gets distorted through religion, which is kind of fucking funny, that there's this force working against us, dragging us down. They'll call it like, matote, or the devil, right? The adversary, however you'd like to refer to it. Something that's working against God and keeping us in this fucking limited, underdeveloped mindset where we're, at the end of the day, selfish and greedy and insecure. I don't necessarily look at it as something that's working against us. You see, again, it's kind of funny because I find it appropriate that as you are coming to the understanding of what you are and what reality is and everything else, that all of history up until this moment, because we've said every moment has a history that's appropriate to its existence, and you are changing your reality in that you are accepting that you are reality. And so you are, in fact, embodying a certain, segment of the developmental process of a collective mentality. You are, in fact, embodying a place within that development of self-awareness of how much you are that necessitates a history that seems underdeveloped by virtue of where you are now, because it all had to lead to here. So when you look back at our collective, what you're looking at is your own growing pains, your own development. Nothing's been holding you back at all, except we've been waiting for you to make the choice to be responsible. And now everything is catching up. Everything is starting to make sense, as it does when we hit our 20s and we look back at all the stupid shit we did when we were teens. And it makes sense now because we're being responsible. It makes sense now because we're taking our time and we're willing to look at it. Same thing collectively. I don't think anything's holding us back. I think that this has just been leading up to you.
And because that's it. And this brings me back to the conversation we've had before, when I like to, ask you just like, what do you think, how much of this do you think Krishnamurti saw, or Alan Watts, or anyone? And they didn't exist as something separate from you. They were all you too. Jesus, Buddha, Hitler, Stalin, all of it were iterations of you. And the ones that we point out, those 6 I just listed, were like sort of like a peak expression of a given mentality, like an embodiment of a bunch of people in a certain mentality kind of And then there was one symbolic thing. Yeah. And it's all expressed from that. And we see it, and based on the given mentality around that, it gets seen in a certain way. And so, Christianity was born from the expression of Jesus, because I don't want to say, it's not that we weren't ready to take that responsibility, but it's almost like now I'm seeing it as, because Christianity is so far from the reality of what Jesus was, that it's like a push and pull, almost like a back and forth to come then to you as yourself. And all of those points in history, everything that's happened has been leading to you recognizing that they weren't what you thought they were. They weren't something else. They weren't anything else. They were all you in progression, growth. They all were necessary.
Spectrum. Let's say spectrum.
Yeah. Necessary in order for you to make sense of it, in a sense. Like they were there because, for me, like listening to, even just in this specific example, listening to Alan Watts, I probably first came across him like 5-6 years ago and didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. Couldn't make any sense of it. But there was a part of me that just kept listening. I would go on a walk and listen to like an hour and a half of his speech. And I didn't think that I understood any of it. And yet I kept coming back to it. Like, why the fuck did I keep doing that? And so I think I perceive all of that as separate, including his life as separate for me. But it's not. It was all within that spectrum of me coming closer to recognizing the reality of me for when I was willing to, because part of me is like, well, everything aligned perfectly in order to recognize that, but
No,
that's
it's just potential. Because understand,
yeah.
it's like we were saying, every path exists, which means that there's a path that you just turned away from Alan Watts and never looked back.
Right. Yeah, because that's me settling upon this story being the only one. But it's not.
It's
There's
just
an
this one.
infinite. Yeah. But then so then why I don't know how to say this, but like then why is this it? Like why, I want to say why this one, but that's not.
Good question, Andrew. Why this one? I hear you. I hear you. This is it. The ego is like, but why? Why? It's like, because you exist as a version of a potential that could exist, and right now you are in one that's going in this direction. That's it. And since you are willingly going along with it, you get to keep experiencing it that way. You can turn back anytime you want. That doesn't mean that this variation doesn't continue to exist. That's why I prefer to just ride it out. But riding it out in this trajectory means letting go, means continuous sacrifice and surrender of everything I think I know, of everything I think I value, of everything that I think I am. Right. And so they're all doors. Every door exists where I turn away. Every door exists where I lose faith. Every door exists where I give into doubt. But there is likewise a door that exists that I don't do any of those things. And so I kind of want to see what's through that door. I've been through the other ones numerous times. I'm kind of curious as to what goes through that door. And since I can do anything I want here, I may as well.
Right. Because even with that question I had, like, why this one, that's just identity wanting to create a story to make sense. And like,
I'm going to blame you.
Yeah. Like I want to, because it isn't that. It isn't a soul path trajectory, whatever. It's not going anywhere. Any iteration of this, all the doors are open right now. And I go through all of them. And I always have been. So is like, I'm trying, and I know this is just like my mind wanting to come to grips with and be able to point to it, but like with all and make sense, even just the image of doors and like a bunch of doors being open. I'm always, because it's not that you're walking through doors or anything. It's just how you can try and communicate it, but it still isn't it. So is it following that? Is it continuing to walk through the same door, but it's not that either, because I'm different each door I walk through. I'm not the same. I'm not Andrew, so I'm not just that choosing each one. And this is the part that's starting to trip me out, because I'm not Andrew walking through doors. I'm reality
walking through Andrew.
Yeah.
See, it's fun because this is where the paradox becomes really difficult. You are everyone and everywhere all the time. And yet you are also simultaneously a single point of awareness traveling through everything you are all the time. That's the perception, right? We just don't look at it that way. We don't look at it as we are traveling through our own awareness. We don't look at this as all of us. We don't. And that limits our perspective of it. That limits what we learn from it. It limits our ability to empathize. It limits everything. Everything, because we perceive that division as being what it is. And it's only because of our self-image. Understand, what we've been talking about this entire time doesn't disregard division as an experience. We're not talking and saying like duality doesn't exist. This is all one thing. I'm not here. We're not saying any of that shit. And what we are saying is that is part of everything you are. All of that duality, all these other points of awareness, they're all part of what you are. Right? So duality is absolutely real in that it's our experience of ourselves. That's it, right? But there's nowhere to go. You're already it. And that's what we're running from. And so back to the question about this specific path. See, it's interesting because I've said it before. There was no good reason I should have woken up. There's no reason that this life shouldn't have just ended. And there's a variation where this life did. Right? And this one continues on. And I've often asked myself, why am I on this path? What is happening? How did I wake up? All of this stuff, where are we going? And it's just me trying to figure out some semblance of an idea. And yet underneath all of that thinking and doubting and wondering and questioning and all of that, the will to move on continues. The will to continue letting go and questioning and surrendering continues. The priority to do so continues to make sense, not because it should, but because it does. I can feel it down in my bones, for fuck's sakes. Right? And so in the Matrix trilogy, in the second movie, I don't know if you've seen that as yet. Have you seen the Matrix trilogy yet?
I Yeah, I'm pretty sure I saw all three.
Okay, cool. So in the second movie, Neo, who is, again, the Atman, like in the Brahman Atman dichotomy, like Brahman is everything, the Atman is man, or the individual, and in Hindu religion, the Atman is Brahman. Like they're the same thing. This is exactly what we're saying. Okay, so in the Matrix, Neo is the embodiment of that recognition that he is, in fact, the Matrix, right? That his mind is everything that he's experiencing, which is why he can break the rules of the Matrix, because he recognizes it's him. More than any of the programming that goes into the Matrix, Neo recognizes that his awareness comes first. And that's why he's able to do what he wants within the Matrix. But in the second movie, he meets the architect, the person who designed the Matrix, and is ultimately trying to be responsible for all of the different variations of choice that could possibly exist in all of humanity. So that's his job, is to come up with an algorithm that can balance all of the collective will and desire and contradictions of humanity. Which decisions are we going to make? How do we influence those decisions? How do we keep people on the straight and narrow? How do we keep people from fucking just, falling into chaos? That's what the algorithm was that formed the Matrix. That's why he says there's been numerous different types of Matrix before now, all of which failed. Some would say because of our poor programming, but it's all the variability, right? And so he says, out of all of those variables, eventually, mathematically, there must be one variation that recognizes that it's the Matrix. It will always happen eventually, through the decisions of everybody else leading to it. Eventually, that possibility must always exist. And that is the best part of that fucking movie, is the fact that Neo is in fact one of several Neos.
So, okay, so that last part, Neo is one of several Neos. What do you mean
There
by
have
that?
been other iterations of Neo that have recognized that he's the awareness of all. It must pop up eventually. It must pop up eventually. Out of all of the possibilities that must pop up, in the same way that there will always eventually be a Hitler. Right? We always see egotism trying to rise to that point of power. We always see it. But on the flip side, we also see the contradiction in all of these people surrendering themselves, Jesus, Buddha, so on and so forth. Like, we don't look at them as the necessary opposite to that trajectory, but they are. Both paths exist.
And they're almost just symbolic of the ends of the spectrum.
Nice.
Sense,
absolutely.
right?
That's all they're symbolic of, is the end of the spectrum between unity and duality. The commitment to division versus the questioning of it.
Right. And so is the commitment to division then like that symbolism of, we point to Hitler or Stalin or any of the people who just got so caught in that, but there's also iterations. Are there iterations that weren't violent in that way? I guess it's all on a spectrum. So even that, it's like what we can say is, yeah, they're symbolic of the end of that spectrum, but there's lots of
cancel culture violent.
No.
And yet it feels oppressive as fuck, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
Violence
so
comes in many forms.
Right. And so it's because, so all of that in a given mentality, and there's lots of iterations of that end of the spectrum of like that egotism side of it, where it's control.
Yeah. And you said something earlier, and I wanted to point this out because, and I liked how you put this. You were talking about like Stalin or Hitler or Jesus or Buddha or any of those things. And it's not about any one of those people so much as they were like the tip of the iceberg for an entire mentality, for an entire group of iterations that resonated on the same level. And this is why I was saying that they were like the hub on a wheel, and all the spokes led to them. It's not that they were in power. It's just that they were the central force and all the spokes were driving that force. And so we look at it egotistically, of course, because we're all separate, right? That we look at it as Hitler and it was Stalin instead of as, there's my ego popping up in bubbles again, right? There's my fear, my need for control popping up in bubbles again. And this time it took the form of Hitler and the Nazi party. But the fact is that it's always popping up in bubbles. We just tend to look at it one person and go, that's the problem, instead of looking at it as a product of our current mentality. It's going to keep popping up until we address it.
And that's like that recognition that people aren't really people that I brought up a couple months ago. I think like I was in some group and just saw people interacting and just saw how much we think that we're the ones saying the words and doing the things, and we're taking ownership for everything happening. As we are now thinking, getting concerned, getting worried, becoming afraid, and all of that. And yet it's still happening. And so we're expressions of me, the expressions of unity on different aspects of the spectrum, taking ownership for the actions that we take, the things that we do, when it isn't really like it is us doing it, but not the you that you think that you are doing it. And that's why shame and guilt and those things are so low on that sort of, any of those enlightenment spectrums or anything like that, because it's the product of a given mentality, and the shame and the guilt are us taking extreme ownership for it. So is it that those spectrums are just the degree of ownership that we take? And as we take less and less ownership, and like the weight of that action being me as opposed to less me, it's like that's the spectrum. I'm curious. I want to look up that
the
spectrum.
idea of me.
Yeah.
Right. It's the ownership as the idea of me. And then as you get let go of that, that's that dividing line between courage and the rest, right? Because after courage, you're just moving forward. That's it. You're like, I don't know what it means about me. I don't think it means anything about me. I don't know where I'm going. Just moving forward. And that's where it really starts changing. It's the same as the levels of ego development. Nothing's changed there. It's actually the same. They're communicating the same thing. Early levels of ego development are very limited, right? They're all based on fear and insecurity and a need for control. Later levels of ego development are all based on the relinquishing of that control for the sake of being more open-minded, for getting more information, for relating to others, for empathy, all that other fun stuff. But for that to happen, you have to stop relying on your ego as a sense of value, right? And truth. And so it's the same spectrum. It's exactly the same spectrum. But it's interesting that you make the point that apathy and guilt and shame, all of which are at the lowest end, are the ones where you are the most committed to your idea of yourself. And because you're so committed to your idea of yourself, the fact that idea is low is crippling you. You actually think that it means you have less value because your idea of yourself seems less valuable. And so, that's actually where you start developing a lot of mental illness, psychosis, things like that, because you're so lost in the idea of yourself rather than the reality.
So, and it's not that there's a shift necessarily. There's not that there's a one shift. It's always shifting in flux, right? Always in potential. But when part of me is curious in people not being people in the way that we think they are. They're very symbolic of a given mentality and expression of a given mentality on, all of it, cycles within cycles we've talked about before. So when does that begin to shift the more you recognize that you're not what you think you are? And there's iterations of that shift in perspective. And it's because it's still not Andrew saying the words. So I guess that's the process of letting go of it, is allowing the symbolism and the expression of being the whole allowed to come through, Andrew, the more you let go of the character. But it's still, you're still not, it's still the recognition that people aren't really people. They're an expression of it. But how much do you recognize that you're not a person? And that shifts the conversation. That shifts where you focus. That shifts what you give your attention to as you let go. So it's not that there's a shift in that you have control by any means, but there's a shift in influence over the whole the more you recognize it. And so you're not so it's not like you're at the will of the expression of the mentality as you would be when you're so caught in your idea of yourself. Like you have very little influence because you keep striving for that control, and the influence increases as you let go of that need for control. But until then, you're just an expression of a given mentality, which you still are. It's just a shifting mentality because you're never what you think you are. But in the mentality where you think you have that control, you are what you think you are what you think you are. And that's the shift and the letting go of that.
It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because now we're starting to talk about, okay, so what the fuck am I actually doing here? And who am I talking about? And that's kind of it. Like, okay, so I'm playing the part of a mentality that I can clearly feel myself willing myself through, right? And yet everybody I'm talking to is also willing themselves through that reality because they're me, right? And so the experience that I'm having right now, I really wondered, like, am I traveling through time, or am I traveling through potential realities? Am I traveling through, like, are we in fact building dualistic unity, or are we simply allowing ourselves to get into a mentality that a world with more dualistic unity would be appropriate for?
Yeah. So
Because there's a world where it grows and a world where it burns.
yeah. And it's because the growth of it is relative to not what we do, but is also that. And so is it that it's us, in recognizing it, like the more you recognize it, the less other people there are. And so there are there, and the shifts are always happening. It's not that there's like, we're building up to one big shift and then everything changes and splits and, all the 5D bullshit and all that stuff. It's like, it's always shifting. It's always changing. All of those paths are always existing in potential. All of those experiences, the one where dualistic unity, it crashes and burns and everyone fucking hates it and kills us for even starting it. And then the experience of all of it, everyone in all of reality being like, dualistic unity. Yeah, we're getting every variation in between. Like those are obviously, the ends of the spectrum in that potential, but both exist and everything in between exists as well. And they're all expressions of me not choosing, but willing to let go of not being the whole through all the iterations of me that I am right now.
Yeah. And what's fun about this is that, again, because everybody's you, everybody's equally as responsible for this change. And so dualistic unity, as much as it will rise and fall according to you yourself and your faith and all of that, it's equally dependent on everybody else's level of faith in terms of applying this stuff in their life, in terms of their support for what this is, in terms of sharing the discussion, sharing their insights, embodying any of these things. Right? This is why we always say, like, dualistic unity lives and dies based on whether or not it's important to you, not just Andrew, not just me, but you, the listener, because you are everything. You are Andrew and you are me. We are very much reflecting what you will, because you share this reality with us. We are a part of the appropriate universe to your current mentality. And that's incredible, really, to be here, playing that part, knowing that I'm playing a part for myself as well as myself. It's a beautiful paradox, but it really just comes down to whether or not you, in as many variations as we can get in touch with, want to let go, because we see that it's an option. That's all that's changing, is that we're introducing the option to the discussion and seeing if this iteration is going to grab hold with it. And this is why the growth of dualistic unity is so exciting, because people are, you are, I am, because it means something. And for Ray, that's surreal, because for Ray, it's meant something for 20 years, right? Without anybody joining, without anybody supporting it or being there necessarily, right? It had to mean something for me. And now I see it meaning something for others, for them, not because it's important to me, but because it's important to them. And that's exactly how I feel. Same with you, Andrew. You change because it's important to you, not because it's important to anyone else, but because it's important to you. And because of that, the other yous are paying attention. The closer they are to recognizing that they're you, the more they're paying attention. That's the point. Just resonating. The rest will find you. The question is, how much does it mean to you? Really, how much does it mean to you? And I don't mean Andrew.
Yeah. I don't have much to add to that. It's yeah, it's a fascinating experience. And even just having this this conversation in the way that we do in the society that we're experiencing is fascinating in itself. Just that
Damned
this
exciting.
is, yeah, very exciting. Just that this is even a conversation that's being had. That's always, it's like it's always been had to a degree. And it's by various iterations of me throughout
It just didn't fit.
time and space. Yeah.
It just didn't fit yet. You know, it's kind of like a 13-year-old starting to think about their mortgage. Like, they wouldn't take it seriously for very long. They might have the thought, like, oh, I'm gonna live on my own one day, and maybe do a little bit of like pre-planning, but it would always be cherry picked. It would always be, you know, like, oh, it's gonna be this and this and this. And then anytime somebody comes over, they're like, well, actually, it's harder than that. You know, this is all no interest, gone. And it's just because it doesn't fit that mentality. And that's it. We've seen this insight pop up over and over and over again through your development, through our development. It's just it didn't fit yet. Right now, we're getting to the point where it's starting to fit because it's becoming relevant to us. You know, because we can see the consequence of it not being relevant to us, right? In our day-to-day lives, we really do. We can feel all of that. And it's becoming more and more obvious that there's a conversation that we haven't been having, because otherwise, why the hell would all this be so confusing, right? But I wanted to mention something quickly before we wrap up here in about 10-15 minutes, that we've been talking about your subjective experience, or the listener's subjective experience, in that everything in the universe, everything that could exist ever for eternity, is within your awareness. And in allowing yourself to accept that it's all you, you actually get way more in terms of insight and experience and the ability to empathize and so on and so forth. But as much as that is important in your imagination and your dreams, it's even more important with other people. When you're talking to another person, that's you. not your character, but you, the blank slate that started as this character before you learned anything. And then you picked up a bunch of other shit along the road. See, it's not that they're you, they should act like you as you currently act. They're you, the blank slate that you were when you started before you picked up all the shit that became your personality. That's what you have to see in people. It's not the character they've become. It's the awareness that's underlying that character that's picked up so much distortion over time. That's what you're seeing. This is what you're empathizing with, that it is damned impossible to go through this dualistic experience without taking it seriously. It's that real. It's that convincing. Of course, we're all fucking enmeshed in it. Of course we are. All of you is. Because you are just waking up. And that changes everything.
And so recognizing that in every interaction that you have maintains it's not that you're convincing anyone of anything, because you can't convince anyone of this. You can't have this conversation that we've just had with someone and them just be like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm chill with that. Because there's so like that blank slate has built so much upon it, relied on so much in order to, do its best to feel better in given situations, that it thought it had to rely upon certain things that hinder the ability to have this conversation. So it's not necessarily like this conversation is a product of peeling back more of those layers and letting go of more of those layers that allows this conversation to happen. But if you bring this conversation to someone immediately, try to convince them of it, they're gonna run, because a lot of it contradicts a lot of the things that they rely upon. And so even just in my own life throughout the process of having this conversation more and more, it's become more and more clear to me how incapable I am of convincing anyone, just like point blank, of any of this, because one phrase, one video, one conversation doesn't do it. There's so many things that are relied upon that are directly contradicting this recognition that they have settled upon throughout their life, that is getting in the way of the ability to have this conversation. But it's always there. Like the recognitions are there in potential as well. It's just not this like snap of a finger thing. And yet we're still out. A lot of people are still out there. They start to get glimpses of this, feel a little bit better, and they're out there trying to convince people of it. But why? What's causing you to want to convince people of it, besides your idea of yourself getting it and feeling better
about other people?
Fuck. Yeah. Yeah. And
That's why I walked away. That's why I stopped making my YouTube channel. Who am I trying to convince? Who am I trying to tell? Who really needs to know this? Because it's not about the concepts. It's like you said, it's not about walking up to someone and saying, you're everyone and I'm you and all of that. But it is about knowing it. And when you look at someone in the eye and you go, how are you? You actually give a fuck because you see them as you. It's not that you're like, how are you? Because you're me and I really care and I want you to know why. You don't have to do any of that. You just have to know it. And that changes how you talk, where it's coming from, and the response that they can give. You're giving them different doors based on how you perceive yourself. That's all it is. That's all it is. It's not about some fucking metaphysical conversation. You don't have to teach someone about the chakras. There's no singing bowls involved. Fuck the incense unless you're smoking weed, that kind of thing. It's just about knowing it. Knowing it, not as a concept, but as self-knowledge, which is being. It's just being what you are without the idea limiting you. That's it. And that's faith. That's all this is. It's just faith. It's just faith. And what you're having faith in is nothing except everything, which is you.
I like that faith in nothing is faith in everything, because it's all you. Cherry picking faith, it's just another egotistical illusion. Like, faith can't exist as faith in anything whatsoever. Ever. It can't. It's like faith has to be in nothing or everything. It's the same sort of thing. I have faith in everything. Like, oh, what does that mean? What do you believe in? What do you mean? Why do you feel the need to believe in something? Why do you feel the need to cling to something? What are you so afraid of? What are you missing? Because that necessitates faith in something, which reinforces the illusion of you being something separate, having faith in something. And it's just, yeah, faith has no specificity. It can't. It just is through it's like a action through a recognition. Because faith is also just a word, just like dream, right? You can't have faith. Yeah, faith is just a symbolic use of a term in order to express the recognition of being
or love.
Yeah.
They're all just words.
Yeah.
They're all just words. They all just point to the same fucking thing, but they're all just words. This is why my holy trinity is relax, pay attention, be yourself. They all mean the same thing.
Right. Because they're never, like, none of them are what you think they are either. And they're all just pointing to the same thing, applicable in different situations based on the experience that you're going through and how you're perceiving the situation that, you know, isn't divided from any other situation. Is just feels different. So you can grab onto a different word that's going to point you to the same sort of thing, because none of the words are the thing that we think they are. And we still, like, it's funny, like, even with dream, that hit me today. Like, a dream, the word dream isn't the reality of what it is. It's just a way that we've described it. We believe the description is what we think it is, and it never is that. So it never is the word. It never is it. It's all just you interacting with yourself. And we just use words in order to express different ways of doing so. You here now. That never changes. We just use different words and terms and definitions and things to express different experiences of that.
Yeah, because it doesn't matter if you're describing a small group of people, a large group of people, a whole country of people, or the world. You've just described another layer of yourself.
Exactly. Because whether it's, no matter what, whether it's a name of a tree, the word dream, still you, the tree, still you, the yard, still you, your friend, still you. It's all just you. And we've utilized all of these terms and concepts in order to convince ourselves that it isn't all just me.
And it's fun when you keep it in mind. When you know it, you're just like, sweet. I can, how did our guest Otto say it? I can wiggle my tongue and that will wiggle the air, which will wiggle your ear. And we can pretend that that's language. And that's funny, right? Because it's not the wiggling of the sound that really is the important part. It's where it's coming from, right?
Right. And because even the connections and interactions are just, it's not that they're as real as you are, but they're still not what you think they are ever. it is just that, the tongue wiggling the air, wiggling your eardrum.
None of which exist.
Exactly. And it's all just your perception of something that you're trying to make sense of. And we've settled upon so many things trying to convince ourselves that I exist as something separate. Like, that's the use of all the terms and all the phrases and all the concepts are just as a means of convincing myself that this isn't just all me. Not even that isn't it. Not even that it isn't a dream, because that's just another word that we've utilized in order to convince ourselves that the experience we have when we're sleeping isn't also just me.
I love the fact that we had no idea where this conversation was going to go. We got together like 5 minutes before we started recording, and I actually asked, "What do you want to talk about?" And you're like, "I don't know." And then we ended up just playing our part for this entire episode, as always, because again, you are also the listener. I am also the listener. Hi, listener. I know you're there listening. And if it wasn't for you, we wouldn't be here speaking as much as we here speaking makes you there listening, because it's all part of the same reality, right? So it makes you wonder, where's this all going? And I don't know, but there is two directions. I think that's all it is. For a consciousness that is everything, there are two directions, either further away from the recognition that it is everything, or towards the recognition that it's everything. And our direction currently collectively is very much in the direction of division and the fear of ourselves and the avoidance of responsibility, because that all sounds terrifying from that state of mind until we recognize it's not. And so this is part of the journey, whatever the journey might be. And it's not really a journey so much as just an option. What do you want to do? You want to tense up and be afraid? Do you want to relax and have faith and be yourself? Because that's all you need to do. It changes everything, because you are everything. You don't need to believe that. Just be, and you'll watch. Just watch. It'll all unfold. That's all that's happened with me. Like, I talk about this stuff, and a lot of people go like, "Oh, well, Ray's been having this conversation for," I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I really don't. Like, all I've gotten really good at is getting out of the way and allowing the insights that go through to come out. That's it. They're not my insights any more than they're your insights. They're just insights. They're just things that are floating around, and you can do what you want with them, but what you do with them is what's important. That's what's important. It's not me saying it. It's not Andrew saying it, because there is no me or Andrew. There's just the communication of you with other parts of you. And that's it. It's rather easy. It's just not necessarily simple to get right away, because there's a lot in the way. Development. Development is the big part I want to get across in this. Like, we are still developing. We have the experience of time. And so therefore we have the experience of development, right? We have the existence of a linear narrative. So what do we want to do with that experience? Because it's not a bad thing. It really just comes down to what we want to do with it. An author would write a story. A painter would make a painting. What would God do?
It's a fantastic question. I'm enjoying finding out. But yeah, it does just come down to that ownership. Like, it's already happening. You're already doing all of it. And your ownership for what's happening it's not even that it's hindering what's already happening. That's an aspect of what's happening as well, but it isn't a necessary aspect of what's happening. You don't have to take ownership for the insights, for the words, for the thoughts. But as you do, sure, you can, especially we like to for the deeper ones, but there's always going to be a consequence to it as we take that ownership. There's nothing wrong with it. It's an option. It's all options here and now. And there's just, yeah, those two directions. And the more ownership you take, the more you run from the recognition that it's all you. Because if you're just this, you're not everything. You still are, but you don't think you are. And through that idea that you're not, there's a whole shitload of consequences that come with that. So are you willing to let that go and find out? That's all it is. We don't know what that means, what that process looks like, or this is us finding out right now.
Because why not? Right. So here we are. So we're going to take a break. We're going to continue on Patreon. You can join us as tier 1 call today. I think it's an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's $5 a month. Definitely worth the time. If you like this conversation, if you have some questions and you would like to ask us in a private environment, join us on Patreon. If not, Tuesday, 6 p.m. Eastern time, we have a call-in show this week. So you are welcome to join us, call in, join us for about 10 minutes on screen. If you have anything you'd like to ask or share, we'd love to hear from you. We'll see you soon.